The spring sun beat down mercilessly on Zenobia Langley's weary shoulders as she stepped off the stagecoach onto the dusty main street of Tulsa, Indian Territory, 1889. At 35, the lines around her eyes told stories of both laughter and sorrow, though lately there had been precious little of the former. Her once prized chestnut hair, now streaked with silver at the temples, was pulled back in a tight bun that strained against the pins holding it in place, much like her patience was straining against the confines of her former life. "End of the line, madam," the driver called down, tossing her weathered carpetbag onto the ground with little ceremony. "Welcome to Tulsa." Zenobia wiped the sweat from her brow with a handkerchief that had once been white but was now stained with the dust of 1,000 miles. This was it, her last chance at a new beginning. Back in Boston, they had whispered behind fans and teacups that Zenobia Langley was past her prime, destined for spinsterhood, too old for marriage. Those whispers had followed her even to her sister's home, where the pity in their eyes had finally become too much to bear. "I need directions to the Meadowlark boarding house," she said to a young boy loitering by the general store. "3 blocks that way, madam," he said, pointing down the street. "Can't miss it. Got a big blue door." Zenobia nodded her thanks and began the walk, her high-buttoned boots already filling with the fine red dust of Oklahoma. She had traveled nearly 2,000 miles to escape those whispers, answering an advertisement in the Boston Chronicle for a schoolteacher in this burgeoning town. Her teaching credentials and stellar references had secured her the position, and the promise of independence of a life that was hers alone had given her the courage to leave everything familiar behind. As she walked, her eyes took in the raw, unfinished nature of Tulsa. Unlike Boston's centuries-old cobblestone streets and brick buildings, this town was still finding its footing. Wooden structures lined the main thoroughfare, some freshly painted, others weathered by sun and wind. Men in work clothes and wide-brimmed hats moved with purpose, while women in practical dresses carried baskets or shepherded children. There was an energy here, an optimism that felt foreign after the stifling propriety of her former life. The Meadowlark boarding house stood at the edge of town, a 2-story structure painted a cheerful yellow with the promised blue door. It was well kept, with neatly trimmed bushes and a small front porch adorned with rocking chairs. For a moment, Zenobia felt a flutter of hope. Perhaps here, where everything and everyone was new, she could be more than an aging spinster. The door opened before she could knock, revealing a plump woman with kind eyes and gray hair tucked under a cap. "You must be Miss Langley, our new schoolteacher," she said with a warm smile. "I'm Mabel Thornton. Welcome to my boarding house." "Thank you, Mrs. Thornton. I appreciate you taking me in on such short notice." "Nonsense. We're happy to have you. Tulsa needs good teachers, and from your letter you seem more than qualified. Come in, come in. I'll show you to your room and then introduce you to the other boarders at supper." The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a plain wooden dresser, and a washstand. A window looked out over a vegetable garden and, beyond that, to the open prairie that seemed to stretch forever. Zenobia placed her carpetbag on the bed and removed her bonnet, sighing with relief as she loosened her hair from its tight constraints. "Supper's at 6 sharp," Mrs. Thornton said from the doorway. "Rest up until then. You've had a long journey." Left alone, Zenobia sank onto the edge of the bed. The springs creaked beneath her weight, a sound so different from the feather mattresses she was accustomed to. Everything was different here. Perhaps she would be different too. She unpacked her meager belongings, arranging them carefully in the dresser drawers. At the bottom of her bag, wrapped in a piece of velvet, lay a small daguerreotype of her parents. Both were gone now, her father to pneumonia, her mother to a broken heart 6 months later. Their deaths had left Zenobia untethered, with only a modest inheritance that would last a few years if she was careful. After washing her face and hands and changing into a fresh dress navy blue with a white collar, modest but flattering Zenobia made her way downstairs for supper. The dining room was simply furnished but comfortable, with a long table set for 8 people. Mrs. Thornton was placing a tureen of soup at the center when Zenobia entered. "Ah, there you are. Come meet the others. Folks, this is Miss Zenobia Langley, our new schoolteacher." 5 faces turned toward her with varying degrees of interest. There were 2 middle-aged men whom Mrs. Thornton introduced as Mr. Peterson, the town's banker, and Mr. Green, who owned the general store. A young married couple, the Wilsons, smiled warmly. He was a clerk at the land office, she a seamstress. The 5th person, a stern-looking woman in her 50s introduced as Miss Holloway, merely nodded. She was the town's telegraph operator, Mrs. Thornton explained, and had lived at the boarding house for 8 years. "We're usually 7, Mrs. Thornton said as she ladled soup into bowls, "but Lucas is often late. He runs the largest cattle operation outside of town and keeps unpredictable hours." As if summoned by her words, the front door opened, and heavy footsteps sounded in the hallway. A moment later, a man entered the dining room, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a lean frame hardened by physical labor. His face, tanned by the sun, bore lines of laughter around his eyes and mouth, though Zenobia guessed he was close to her own age, perhaps a few years older. His hair, dark brown with threads of silver at the temples, was slightly too long, curling over his collar. "Sorry I'm late, Mabel," he said in a deep voice that carried the slow cadence of the West. "Had a situation with the north fence line." "You're just in time to meet our newest boarder," Mrs. Thornton replied. "Lucas, this is Miss Zenobia Langley, our new schoolteacher." "Miss Langley, this is Lucas Armstrong." Lucas turned to Zenobia, and she found herself caught in the direct gaze of the clearest blue eyes she had ever seen. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, as if taking her measure. Then he smiled, a slow, genuine smile that transformed his weathered face. "Miss Langley," he said, extending his hand. "Welcome to Tulsa." Zenobia hesitated only briefly before taking his hand. His palm was rough with calluses, his grip firm but gentle. "Thank you, Mr. Armstrong." "Lucas, please," he said, still holding her hand a moment longer than was strictly proper. "We don't stand on ceremony much out here." When he finally released her hand and took his seat at the table directly across from her, as fate would have it, Zenobia found herself flustered in a way she hadn't been in years. She busied herself with her soup, aware that Miss Holloway was watching the interaction with narrowed eyes. Conversation flowed around the table as supper progressed from soup to a hearty stew with fresh bread. The Wilsons were particularly curious about Boston, peppering Zenobia with questions about the city's architecture and social scene. Mr. Peterson asked about her teaching credentials, seeming satisfied with her answers. Only Miss Holloway remained aloof, contributing little to the conversation. Lucas Armstrong spoke little, but Zenobia was acutely aware of his presence, of his occasional glances in her direction. When he did speak, it was with thoughtful insight about the town, its needs and its people. "You'll have your work cut out for you," he told her as Mrs. Thornton served apple pie for dessert. "The children here are eager enough, but they've had 3 different teachers in the past year. None could handle the challenges of frontier education." "I assure you, Mr. Armstrong, I'm no stranger to challenges," Zenobia replied, meeting his gaze steadily. I've taught in conditions ranging from overcrowded city classrooms to private tutoring for the children of Boston's elite. "And what brings a Boston lady all the way to Tulsa?" he asked, his eyes curious but not unkind. "It's a long way from home." Zenobia felt the weight of everyone's attention. This was the question she had been dreading, the one that might expose her vulnerability. "I was seeking a change," she said carefully. "A new horizon." Lucas nodded slowly, as if he understood more than she had said. "Well, we've got horizons in abundance out here." After supper, while the others retired to the parlor for coffee, Zenobia excused herself to prepare for her first day of teaching tomorrow. As she climbed the stairs, she heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Lucas Armstrong on the landing below. "Miss Langley," he said, his voice lower now that they were alone, "I hope I didn't make you uncomfortable with my questions at supper." "Not at all," she assured him. "They were perfectly reasonable." He climbed a few more steps, bringing them closer. "The truth is, I'm glad you're here. This town needs someone like you, someone with experience and—" He paused, searching for the right word. "Perspective." The way he said perspective made Zenobia wonder if he was obliquely referring to her age, and she felt a familiar defensiveness rise within her. "Yes, well, I hope to bring both to my position." Lucas seemed to sense her withdrawal. "I've offended you somehow." "No," she said quickly. "I'm simply tired from my journey." He studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "Of course. Rest well, Miss Langley. And if you need anything advice about the town, the people, the children you'll be teaching, my door is the one at the end of the hall." With that, he tipped an imaginary hat and continued up the stairs past her, leaving Zenobia with the unsettling feeling that Lucas Armstrong might be able to see right through the carefully constructed facade she had maintained for so long. The first day of school dawned clear and bright. Zenobia dressed with care in a practical gray dress with a lace collar, her hair pinned neatly beneath a small hat. The schoolhouse was a single-room wooden building at the edge of town, with rows of desks facing a raised platform where a teacher's desk and blackboard stood. 27 children of various ages awaited her, their faces a mix of curiosity, wariness, and in some cases, outright mischief. Zenobia had dealt with far worse in Boston's crowded schools, however, and by midday, she had established a clear routine and expectations for behavior. During the lunch break, as the children ate their packed meals outside in the schoolyard, Zenobia was surprised by a knock at the door. Lucas Armstrong stood there, holding a basket. "Mrs. Thornton asked me to bring this by," he said, entering when she gestured him in. "She thought you might have forgotten to pack a lunch in the excitement of your first day." Indeed, Zenobia had been too nervous to think about food that morning. "That was very thoughtful of her," she said, accepting the basket, which contained a sandwich, an apple, and a small jar of lemonade. Lucas glanced around the schoolroom, taking in the neat rows of desks and the lessons she had written on the blackboard. "How's it going so far?" "Better than I expected," Zenobia admitted. "The children are quite bright, though their previous education has been inconsistent." "That's putting it kindly." Lucas leaned against one of the desks. "The last teacher left after Tommy Wilson put a snake in her desk drawer." Zenobia smiled. "Yes, he tried that this morning. Unfortunately for him, I grew up with 3 brothers who were far more creative in their mischief." Lucas laughed, a rich, warm sound that filled the small schoolhouse. "I'd have paid good money to see Tommy's face when his plan failed." "He was quite disappointed," Zenobia agreed, "but I think we've come to an understanding now." Lucas's expression grew more serious. "You know, when the school board hired you, some folks had their doubts. They thought a city woman wouldn't last a week out here." "And what did you think, Mr. Armstrong?" Zenobia asked, curiosity getting the better of her. "I thought they were underestimating you," he said simply. "I still do." Before she could respond to this unexpected vote of confidence, the children began streaming back into the classroom, their chatter filling the air. Lucas straightened and tipped his hat to her. "I'll leave you to your work, Miss Langley. Enjoy your lunch." As the weeks passed, Zenobia fell into a routine at both the school and the boarding house. The children responded well to her firm but fair approach, and she found herself genuinely enjoying their eager minds and frontier resourcefulness. At the boarding house, she became part of the small community of residents, sharing meals and evening conversations in the parlor. Lucas Armstrong remained something of an enigma. Some evenings, he joined them for cards or checkers, his dry wit and thoughtful observations adding depth to the conversations. Other times, he was absent for days, tending to his cattle operation or traveling to neighboring towns on business. Zenobia told herself that her awareness of his comings and goings was merely the natural curiosity one had about a fellow boarder, nothing more. One evening in late April, as a spring storm lashed against the windows of the boarding house, Zenobia sat alone in the parlor, reading by lamplight. The others had retired early, but she found herself unable to sleep, her mind too full of the day's events. "May I join you?" Lucas's voice startled her from her thoughts. He stood in the doorway, a book in his own hand. "Of course," she said, gesturing to the armchair opposite her. He sat down. Opening his book, she glimpsed the title, Essays by Ralph Waldo Emerson, but made no immediate move to read it. Instead, he studied her with those perceptive blue eyes. "You seem troubled tonight," he observed. Zenobia considered deflecting, as was her habit, but something about the quiet room, the rain on the windows, and his genuine concern made her answer honestly. "I received a letter from my sister in Boston today. It brought back memories I'd rather not dwell on. Bad memories." "Not bad exactly, just complicated." She closed her book, marking her place with a ribbon. "My sister means well, but she has a way of reminding me of everything I left behind." Lucas nodded thoughtfully. "Family has a talent for that. They can wound us more deeply than strangers ever could, often without intending to." "You speak from experience," Zenobia observed. "Some." He smiled, but there was a shadow behind it. "I haven't seen my own family in 15 years. My father and I had differences of opinion about my future. He didn't approve of your choice to come west. He had my life mapped out for me in Philadelphia, a position in his law firm, marriage to the daughter of his business partner, a house 2 streets from his own." Lucas shook his head. "I wanted something different, something that was mine, not his." "So you chose cattle ranching in Indian Territory," Zenobia said with a small smile. "Quite a departure." "About as far as I could get," he agreed. "What about you? What were you running from in Boston?" The direct question caught her off guard. "What makes you think I was running from something?" Lucas's gaze was steady. "People come west for 2 reasons, Miss Langley. Either they're running towards something or they're running away from something. Sometimes both." Zenobia looked down at her hands, considering how much to reveal. "I suppose I was running from expectations, other people's expectations of what a woman my age should be, should want, should accept." "And what should a woman your age accept, according to Boston society?" His tone was genuinely curious, without judgment. "Invisibility," she said softly. "Gratitude for any crumbs of attention. A permanent place on the periphery of other people's lives as the helpful sister, the doting aunt, the reliable spinster friend who can always be counted on to organize the church social, but never to dance at it." The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. She hadn't intended to be so candid, but something about Lucas Armstrong made her want to be honest. He was silent for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "Their loss," he said finally. "Anyone who can't see your worth isn't worth your time." The simplicity of his statement, delivered without pity or condescension, touched Zenobia deeply. "Thank you," she said quietly. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the rain against the windows. Finally, Lucas spoke again. "Would you care for a game of chess? I noticed you watching when Peterson and I played last week." "I haven't played in years," Zenobia admitted. "Then I promised to be gentle," he said with a smile that made her heart beat faster. "At least until you remember the rules." They set up the chessboard on the small table between them, and as they played, Zenobia found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in a very long time. Lucas was a patient opponent, not rushing her when she took time to consider her moves, and genuinely pleased when she made a clever play. "Checkmate," she said triumphantly after their third game, having regained her old skill with surprising speed. Lucas laughed, surrendering his king with a graceful gesture. "I should have known better than to underestimate a schoolteacher's strategic abilities." As they put away the chess pieces, their hands brushed briefly, sending an unexpected jolt of awareness through Zenobia. She drew back quickly, confused by her reaction. "It's getting late," she said, rising from her chair. "I should retire." Lucas stood as well, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Of course. Thank you for the games, Miss Langley. It's been a pleasure." "Zenobia," she said impulsively, "if we're not to stand on ceremony out here, you should call me Zenobia." His smile was slow and warm. "Zenobia," he repeated, the name sounding different in his deep voice. "Good night, then, Zenobia." "Good night, Lucas." As she climbed the stairs to her room, Zenobia wondered what had possessed her to encourage such familiarity. It was hardly proper, even in the relaxed social standards of the frontier. Yet she couldn't bring herself to regret it. For the first time in years, she had felt truly seen, not as an aging spinster, not as a convenient helper, but as a woman of value, of interest. The feeling was as intoxicating as it was dangerous. The next morning, Zenobia woke to sunshine streaming through her window and the distant sound of birdsong. Saturday, no school today. She dressed in a simple blue skirt and white shirtwaist, planning to visit the general store for supplies and perhaps explore more of Tulsa now that the spring weather had improved. At breakfast, Lucas was absent, which was not unusual for a Saturday. Mr. Green mentioned that he had ridden out at dawn, something about a new foal expected at his ranch. "His place is quite impressive, you know," Mr. Peterson commented between bites of his eggs. "Armstrong's built it up from nothing over the past decade. Most successful operation in the county now." "He works too hard," Mrs. Thornton said, refilling coffee cups. "That man needs a wife to look after him, make sure he eats properly and doesn't work himself to death." Miss Holloway sniffed. "Not likely at his age. Most of the eligible women around here are looking for younger men, not confirmed bachelors set in their ways." "Nonsense," Mrs. Thornton replied, casting a quick glance at Zenobia that made her cheeks warm. "Lucas Armstrong is in his prime. Any woman would be lucky to have him." Zenobia kept her eyes fixed on her plate, uncomfortable with the turn in conversation. She was accustomed to being the subject of matchmaking efforts back in Boston, always with widowers looking for a mother for their children or men whose first wives had rejected them. The thought that Mrs. Thornton might be harboring similar ideas about her, and Lucas, was both embarrassing and oddly painful. She had no illusions about her appeal as a marriage prospect. She had made peace with her spinsterhood long ago. After breakfast, Zenobia set out for the general store, enjoying the warm spring air. Tulsa was coming alive with the season, with new green growth pushing through the red soil and wildflowers dotting the prairie beyond the town's boundaries. She had just selected a new slate pencil and some paper when the bell over the door jingled, and Lucas entered the store. He looked different in the daylight, more rugged, more firmly rooted in this frontier world. His clothes were practical and well-worn, his boots dusty from the road. Yet there was a quiet dignity about him, a confidence that came from knowing his place in the world. "Zenobia," he said, his eyes lighting up when he saw her. "Good morning." "Good morning," she replied, acutely aware of the store clerk's curious gaze at their familiar address. "I didn't expect to see you in town today. Mr. Green mentioned something about a foal, born without complications, thankfully," Lucas said, removing his hat. "I rode in to pick up a few supplies and to see the blacksmith about a wagon repair. Your ranch must keep you very busy." "It does, though I have good men working for me now." He hesitated, then added, "Actually, I was hoping to catch you today. I wondered if you might like to ride out to see the place tomorrow after church. It's only about 5 miles, and the countryside is beautiful right now with all the wildflowers." Zenobia was momentarily speechless. Was he asking to court her? No, that was ridiculous. It was simply a neighborly invitation, nothing more. That would be lovely," she managed to say. "Though I must confess I haven't ridden in years." "I have a gentle mare that would suit you perfectly," Lucas assured her, "and we can take it slow." "Then yes, thank you, I would enjoy that." His smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "Excellent. I'll arrange everything with Mrs. Thornton. We can leave after Sunday dinner." As he tipped his hat and moved to speak with the clerk, Zenobia found herself both excited and apprehensive about the outing. It was innocent enough people visited each other's homes all the time in small communities like Tulsa. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that this invitation represented a turning point of some kind, a step towards something she had long ago convinced herself was not meant for her. Sunday dawned clear and mild, perfect weather for a ride in the country. Zenobia wore her best dress to church, a deep green that brought out the amber flecks in her hazel eyes, and was rewarded with an appreciative glance from Lucas when he joined the boarding house residents in their usual pew. After services, they returned to the boarding house for Sunday dinner, a hearty meal of roast chicken and vegetables that Mrs. Thornton served with obvious pleasure, especially after Lucas announced their plans to ride out to his ranch. "Oh, that's wonderful," she exclaimed. "Miss Langley hasn't seen much of the countryside yet. And your place is so beautiful in the spring, Lucas." Miss Holloway's mouth tightened in disapproval, but she said nothing, merely cutting her chicken with precise movements that betrayed her tension. An hour later, Zenobia found herself mounted on a chestnut mare named Daisy, following Lucas along a well-traveled road that wound through rolling prairie dotted with vibrant wildflowers. The day was perfect, warm but not hot, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of grass and earth. "How long have you had your ranch?" she asked as they rode side by side, the horses walking at an easy pace. "I bought the first 100 acres 10 years ago," Lucas replied. "It was nothing but open grassland, then good grazing, but no structures, no fences. I lived in a tent that first year while I built the cabin. By yourself, for the most part, hired help when I could afford it." He smiled at the memory. "Those were lean times, but every year got a little better. I added more land, more cattle. Built proper fencing, then a barn, then expanded the cabin into a house. You must be very proud of what you've accomplished." "I am," he said simply. "It's mine, earned with my own hands. No one can take that from me." They rode in companionable silence for a while, Zenobia gradually relaxing into the rhythm of horseback riding, remembering skills she hadn't used since girlhood. Lucas was a patient guide, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the land and its history. "There it is," he said finally, gesturing ahead as they crested a low hill. Armstrong Ranch. Zenobia caught her breath at the sight. Nestled in a valley with a small creek running through it was a picturesque homestead. A substantial two-story house of weathered wood stood proudly at the center, with a wide porch wrapping around it. Nearby were a large barn, several outbuildings, and corrals where cattle and horses grazed. Beyond stretched fenced pastures that seemed to go on forever, dotted with the red-brown shapes of cattle. "It's beautiful," she said sincerely. Lucas's expression was a mix of pride and something deeper, more vulnerable. "It's home," he said quietly. As they rode down into the valley, a young man emerged from the barn, waving in greeting. "That's Jake, my foreman," Lucas explained. "He lives in the bunkhouse with the other hands." They dismounted near the house, and Lucas helped Zenobia down, his hands strong and steady at her waist. The momentary closeness sent a flutter through her stomach that she firmly ignored. "Miss Langley," Jake said, tipping his hat when Lucas introduced them. "Boss has been talking about bringing you out to see the place. Glad you could make it." "Thank you," Zenobia replied, wondering exactly what Lucas had been saying about her to his employees. Jake took the horses, promising to water and feed them, while Lucas led Zenobia toward the house. "I thought we might have some coffee on the porch," he suggested. "The view is particularly nice this time of day." The interior of the house surprised Zenobia. She had expected a bachelor's sparse accommodations, but instead found a well-appointed, comfortable home. The furniture was solid and well-crafted, the floors covered with quality rugs, and the walls adorned with a few good paintings. A bookshelf in the parlor held an impressive collection of volumes, many of which she recognized as classics. "Your home is lovely," she said as Lucas prepared coffee in the kitchen. "Not at all what I expected." "What did you expect?" he asked, glancing at her with amusement. "Something more rustic, I suppose." Lucas laughed. "It was in the beginning. But over the years, I've made it more comfortable. I believe in creating beauty where you can, even out here." "A philosophy I share," Zenobia said, touched by his sentiment. They took their coffee to the porch, where two rocking chairs faced the view of the valley. Sitting there, watching the play of light across the landscape as the afternoon progressed, Zenobia felt a peace she hadn't experienced in years. "I can see why you love it here," she said after a comfortable silence. "It's so vast, so free." Lucas nodded. "That's exactly it, the freedom. Room to breathe, to be yourself without constantly worrying about what others think." "I'm beginning to understand that appeal," Zenobia admitted. "Boston society can be suffocating in its expectations." "And what were those expectations, if you don't mind my asking?" Lucas's voice was gentle, without pressure. Zenobia sipped her coffee, considering her answer. "For a woman, it's simple: marry young, have children, maintain a perfect household, support your husband's ambitions while having none of your own. If you fail at the first step marriage as I did, you become a footnote in other people's stories." "You never wanted to marry?" Lucas asked carefully. "I did once." Zenobia found herself sharing a story she rarely told. "I was engaged at 22 to a promising young lawyer. 2 weeks before the wedding, he broke it off. He'd met someone else younger, wealthier, better connected." "I'm sorry," Lucas said, and she could hear the genuine regret in his voice. "It was a long time ago," Zenobia said with a small shrug. "But in Boston's social circles, such a rejection leaves a mark. After that, there were a few suitors, but none serious. As I approached 30, they dwindled. By 35, she trailed off, then gave a brittle laugh. "Well, let's just say I'd heard plenty of whispers about being on the shelf and past one's prime." Lucas's expression darkened. "Fools," he said, the word carrying unexpected heat. "Absolute fools. It's the way of the world, Zenobia said, surprised by his vehemence. Women have a limited window for marriage, while men can wait as long as they please. Not the way of my world, Lucas replied firmly. Out here, we value people for their character, their strength, their heart, not for how many birthdays they've had or what some society matrons whisper behind their fans. The conviction in his voice moved her deeply. That's a refreshing perspective. It's the truth, he said simply. Then, after a moment's hesitation, Zenobia, may I ask you something personal? You've already asked me several personal things, she pointed out with a small smile. But yes, you may. Are you happy here in Tulsa, teaching the children living at the boarding house? The question caught her off guard. Yes, she said after a moment's consideration. Yes, I believe I am. More so than I've been in a long time. The work is meaningful, the children are wonderful in their own chaotic way, and I feel useful. Valued for my skills rather than pitied for my circumstances. Lucas nodded, his eyes never leaving her face. I'm glad. You deserve that happiness. There was something in his tone, in the intensity of his gaze, that made Zenobia's heart beat faster. Before she could respond, however, Jake appeared at the edge of the porch. Sorry to interrupt, boss, but that new bull is acting up again. Might need your help with him. Lucas sighed and rose from his chair. Duty calls. Would you mind waiting here? I shouldn't be long. Of course, Zenobia assured him. Take your time. Left alone on the porch, she let her gaze wander over the ranch. It truly was beautiful, not in the manicured, formal way of Boston's grand estates, but in a wilder, more honest fashion. This was a place carved from the wilderness by one man's vision and hard work, a testament to Lucas Armstrong's determination and skill. She found herself wondering what it would be like to live in such a place, to wake each morning to this view, to build a life here. It was a dangerous line of thought, one that could lead only to disappointment, yet she couldn't help herself. Lucas returned about 20 minutes later, apologetic for the interruption. The hazards of ranching, he explained. Animals don't care about your social plans. It's quite all right, Zenobia assured him. I've been enjoying the view. They spent another hour on the porch, talking easily about books they'd read, places they'd seen, and their respective childhoods, his in Philadelphia, hers in Boston. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Lucas reluctantly suggested they start back to town. I'd hate for you to be riding after dark, he explained. The trail can be tricky in low light, even with a moon. The ride back to Tulsa was peaceful, the golden light of late afternoon casting everything in a warm glow. They talked less on the return journey, but the silence between them was comfortable, filled with unspoken thoughts and growing understanding. At the boarding house, Lucas helped Zenobia dismount once again, his hands lingering at her waist for just a moment longer than necessary. Thank you for coming today, he said softly. It meant a lot to me to show you my home. Thank you for inviting me, she replied, suddenly shy under the intensity of his gaze. I enjoyed it very much. He held her eyes for a long moment, and Zenobia had the distinct impression he wanted to say something more. Instead, he simply squeezed her hand gently before mounting his horse again. Good night, Zenobia. I'll see you at breakfast. Good night, Lucas. As she watched him ride away, Zenobia knew with absolute certainty that something fundamental had changed between them today. What exactly that change meant and where it might lead, she wasn't yet sure. But for the first time in many years, she found herself looking toward the future with hope rather than resignation. The following weeks brought a subtle shift in Zenobia's relationship with Lucas. They sought each other's company more deliberately, sharing books, playing chess in the evenings, walking together after supper when the weather was fine. Their conversations grew deeper, more personal, as they discovered the many ways in which their different backgrounds had nonetheless led them to similar values and perspectives. The other boarding house residents noticed, of course. Mrs. Thornton beamed approvingly whenever she saw them together, while Miss Holloway's disapproval became increasingly obvious. The Wilsons exchanged knowing glances, and Mr. Peterson occasionally made teasing comments that made Zenobia blush. Only Mr. Green seemed genuinely concerned, pulling Zenobia aside one evening after Lucas had excused himself to attend to some ranch business. "Miss Langley," he said hesitantly, "I hope you won't think me presumptuous, but I feel I should speak to you about Lucas Armstrong." "What about him?" Zenobia asked, instantly wary. "He's a good man, one of the best I know," Mr. Green assured her. "But he's also set in his ways. He's been on his own a long time, built his life exactly as he wants it. I wouldn't want to see you hurt if he's not." "Well, if he's not looking for the kind of commitment a lady like yourself deserves." Zenobia felt her cheeks grow warm with embarrassment. "Mr. Green, I assure you, Mr. Armstrong and I are merely friends. There has been no suggestion of anything more." The storekeeper looked skeptical but nodded. "Of course. Well, we've all grown fond of you, Miss Langley. You're doing wonders with the children, and you've brought a certain refinement to our little community that we value highly." "Thank you," Zenobia said, touched by his concern despite her embarrassment. "I value my place here as well. Please don't worry about me, I'm quite capable of managing my own affairs." Yet that night, alone in her room, she found herself pondering Mr. Green's words. Was she developing feelings for Lucas that went beyond friendship? And if so, was she setting herself up for heartbreak? After all, he had never spoken of anything more than friendship, never given any clear indication that he saw her as a potential wife. The thought made her laugh bitterly at herself. A wife. At 35, with silver threading her hair and lines forming at the corners of her eyes. What man would choose her when there were younger women available, women who could still bear children, women whose beauty hadn't yet begun to fade? No, friendship was all she could realistically hope for from Lucas Armstrong, and she would be grateful for that, would cherish it without yearning for more. It was the sensible approach, the one that would protect her heart from further damage. Yet when she saw him the next morning at breakfast, when his eyes lit up at the sight of her, and he smiled that slow, warm smile that seemed reserved just for her, sensible thoughts fled, replaced by a flutter of hope she couldn't quite suppress. May turned to June, bringing with it the end of the school year and the beginning of Tulsa's hot, dry summer. The children presented Zenobia with a handmade book of their stories and drawings on the last day of school, a gesture that brought tears to her eyes. "Will you be our teacher again next year, Miss Langley?" little Sarah Wilson asked, her eyes wide with hope. "Yes, of course," Zenobia assured her, surprised to realize how much she meant it. Tulsa had become home in a way Boston never had, these children as dear to her as any family might be. That evening, Lucas suggested they celebrate the end of the school year with a picnic by the creek that ran near the edge of town. "You've earned a rest," he said, his blue eyes warm with admiration. "Let me do this for you." They rode out after supper, arriving at the creek just as the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon. Lucas spread a blanket beneath a cottonwood tree and unpacked a basket containing cold chicken, fresh bread, strawberries, and a bottle of wine. "This is lovely," Zenobia said, settling onto the blanket and accepting the glass of wine he offered. "Though I'm not sure I deserve such special treatment." "You do," Lucas said firmly. "I've heard nothing but praise for your teaching from every parent in town." "You've made a real difference here, Zenobia." His use of her given name still sent a small thrill through her, even after weeks of such familiarity. "Thank you," That means a great deal coming from you." They ate in companionable silence for a while, watching the play of light on the water and listening to the evening chorus of birds. As the sun dipped lower, casting golden red light across the landscape, Lucas grew quieter, seemingly lost in thought. "Is something wrong?" Zenobia finally asked, concerned by his unusual silence. Lucas looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with a deep breath, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "I had planned to do this differently," he said, his voice lower than usual. "To court you properly first, to make my intentions clear over time. But I find I can't wait any longer, can't risk someone else recognizing what I see so clearly." Zenobia stared at the box, her heart suddenly racing. "Lucas, what are you saying?" He moved closer to her on the blanket, taking her hand in his. "I'm saying that these past months, getting to know you, have been the happiest of my life. I'm saying that I admire your intelligence, your strength, your kindness. I'm saying that I can't imagine my life without you in it anymore." He opened the box to reveal a ring, a delicate band of gold with a small but perfect diamond at its center. "I'm asking you to marry me, Zenobia, to share my life, my home, my future." Zenobia felt as though the world had tilted beneath her. This couldn't be happening not to her, not after all these years of resignation and acceptance of her spinsterhood. I don't understand," she stammered. "Why me? Why now?" Lucas smiled gently, understanding in his eyes. "Why you? Because you're the most remarkable woman I've ever known. Because you challenge me, intrigue me, make me laugh. Because the thought of seeing you each morning makes me eager to wake up, and the memory of your smile keeps me company on lonely nights." He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch achingly tender. "Why now?" "Because at our age, we know what matters. We've lived enough to recognize true worth when we find it, to understand that time is precious and not to be wasted on games or uncertainties." Zenobia's eyes filled with tears. "Lucas, I'm 35 years old." "Past the age when most women—" "I'm 41, he interrupted. "Does that make me too old for love? For happiness?" "No, of course not, but it's different for men, it shouldn't be," he said firmly. "Age is just a number, Zenobia. What matters is who we are, what we feel, what we can build together." A tear spilled down her cheek. "Back in Boston, they said I was too old for marriage, that my chance had passed." Lucas's expression hardened momentarily. "Then they were fools, as I said before. You're not too old, you're just in time for mine." The simple sincerity of his words broke through the last of her defenses. "Yes," she whispered, another tear tracking down her cheek. "Yes, Lucas, I will marry you." His face transformed with joy, and he slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that trembled slightly. Then he gathered her close, his kiss tender yet passionate, a promise of the life they would build together. When they finally drew apart, both breathless, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Zenobia Langley. I think I've loved you since that first night you beat me at chess." She laughed, joy bubbling up inside her like a spring. "I love you too, Lucas Armstrong. More than I ever thought possible." They returned to the boarding house late that evening, their happiness evident to everyone who saw them. Mrs. Thornton cried tears of joy when they announced their engagement, hugging them both with motherly affection. The Wilsons offered sincere congratulations, while Mr. Peterson slapped Lucas on the back and declared he'd finally come to his senses. Even Mr. Green seemed pleased, his earlier concerns apparently laid to rest. Only Miss Holloway remained aloof, offering a tight-lipped best wishes before retreating to her room. Her disapproval couldn't touch Zenobia's happiness, however. Nothing could, not now. Later, alone in her room, Zenobia looked at the ring sparkling on her finger in the lamplight. It felt both strange and right, a symbol of the unexpected turn her life had taken. 6 months ago, she had come to Tulsa seeking independence, a place where she could be valued for her skills rather than judged for her unmarried state. She had found that and so much more, a community that welcomed her, work that fulfilled her, and a man who loved her exactly as she was. They planned a summer wedding, seeing no reason to wait. Lucas wanted to marry at his ranch, with the ceremony taking place on the porch and the celebration spreading across the lawn to the creek. Zenobia agreed readily, already thinking of the ranch as home in her heart. The weeks leading up to the wedding were filled with preparations and unexpected challenges. Chief among these was a letter from Zenobia's sister in Boston, responding to the news of her engagement with barely disguised shock. "Are you certain this is wise?" Margaret wrote. "A cattleman in Indian Territory hardly seems a suitable match for a woman of your background and education. And at your age, dear sister, marriage brings its own complications. Have you considered that children may be difficult, if not impossible? That this man may have expectations you cannot fulfill?" The letter stung, reopening wounds Zenobia had thought healed. She said nothing to Lucas about it, not wanting to dampen their joy with her sister's doubts. But the questions lingered in her mind, especially the one about children. It was true that at 35, her chances of motherhood were diminishing. Would Lucas come to regret his choice if she couldn't give him a family? The question became too heavy to bear alone, and one evening as they sat on the porch of the boarding house watching a summer storm roll across the prairie, she finally voiced her fears. "Lucas," she began hesitantly, "there's something we haven't discussed, something important." He turned to her, instantly attentive. "What is it, love? Children," she said simply. "At my age I may not be able to give you a family. Would that make you regret marrying me?" Lucas was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. Then he took her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "Zenobia, listen to me. I'm marrying you because I love you, because I want to share my life with you. Yes, I would welcome children if they come to us, but they're not a requirement for my happiness." He smiled, a tender curve of his lips that made her heart ache with love. "Besides, there are many ways to build a family. There are children in Tulsa who need love and guidance. If we can't have children of our own, perhaps we could offer a home to one of them." Relief washed through her. "You've thought about this?" "Of course I have," he said simply. "I've thought about every aspect of our future together, and in every version of that future the only essential element is you." She leaned against his shoulder, her fears eased by his steadfast love. "Thank you for understanding." "Always," he promised, pressing a kiss to her temple. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the July sun warming the land without the oppressive heat that sometimes plagued Oklahoma summers. At the ranch, preparations had been underway since dawn, tables set up under the trees, flowers arranged, food prepared in quantities to feed the entire town. In the master bedroom of the ranch house, now transformed with feminine touches in anticipation of Zenobia's arrival as mistress of the house, she prepared for the ceremony with Mrs. Thornton's help. Her dress, ordered from a seamstress in Tulsa, was a simple but elegant creation of ivory silk with lace at the collar and cuffs. Her hair was arranged in a sophisticated twist, with a few curls left free to frame her face, and atop it sat a small wreath of wildflowers gathered that morning. "You look beautiful," Mrs. Thornton said, her eyes misting with tears. "Absolutely radiant." Zenobia studied her reflection in the mirror. The woman who looked back at her wasn't young, it was true. The silver threads in her hair caught the light, and the lines at the corners of her eyes deepened when she smiled. But there was something else there too, a confidence, a joy, a sense of rightness that transformed her more effectively than any cosmetic could have done. "I feel beautiful," she said simply, "for perhaps the first time in my life." A knock at the door announced the arrival of Mr. Peterson, who had agreed to walk Zenobia down the aisle in the absence of her father or brothers. "It's time," he said, his usually gruff voice softened with emotion. "Everyone's waiting, and Lucas looks like he might jump out of his skin with anticipation." Zenobia laughed, a bright sound of pure happiness. "Then we shouldn't keep him waiting." The ceremony itself was simple but deeply moving. Lucas, handsome in a new black suit with a white shirt and string tie, waited for her on the porch with the minister from Tulsa's small church. As Zenobia walked toward him on Mr. Peterson's arm, the assembled townspeople and ranch hands watching from chairs set up on the lawn, she saw only Lucas, his face, his smile, his eyes that held so much love it nearly overwhelmed her. They exchanged traditional vows, their voices clear and sure in the summer air. When Lucas slipped a gold band onto her finger to join her engagement ring, his hands were steady, his eyes never leaving hers. And when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Lucas's kiss was a promise, a beginning, a homecoming. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening, with food and drink flowing freely. Music from a local fiddler and guitarist inspiring dancing on the grass, and congratulations offered from what seemed like every resident of Tulsa and the surrounding area. Even Miss Holloway attended, her usual reserve softened somewhat by the evident happiness of the bride and groom. As twilight descended, Lucas found Zenobia sitting by the creek, taking a moment's respite from the festivities. He sat beside her, taking her hand now adorned with 2 rings in his. "Happy Mrs. Armstrong?" he asked, his voice low and intimate. The new name sent a thrill through her. "Completely," she assured him. "Though it feels like a dream, I keep expecting to wake up back in Boston, alone in my sister's guest room." Lucas laughed softly. "If it's a dream, then we're sharing it." He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "And I never want to wake up." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching as the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the sky. Finally, Lucas spoke again, his tone thoughtful. "You know, when I came west, I thought I was just running away from my father's plans for me. I didn't realize I was running toward something toward this land, this life." He turned to face her, his expression earnest. "Toward you, though I didn't know it then." Zenobia touched his face gently, tracing the lines at the corners of his eyes. "And I thought I was coming to Tulsa to hide from pitying glances and whispered judgments. Instead, I found everything I'd ever wanted but had stopped believing I deserved." "You deserve the world, Zenobia Armstrong," Lucas said firmly. "And I intend to spend the rest of my life trying to give it to you." Their kiss beneath the stars sealed that promise, marking the beginning of a life neither had expected but both had secretly longed for, a life built on mutual respect, shared values, and a love that defied convention and expectation. 5 years later, the Armstrong Ranch had changed in subtle but significant ways over the past 5 years. The house had been expanded to include a dedicated schoolroom, where Zenobia now taught the children of the ranch hands and neighboring homesteaders. The gardens had been enlarged and beautified, with roses climbing trellises and neat vegetable beds producing food for the table. And the sound of children's laughter filled the air more often than not. Zenobia stood on the porch, watching as Lucas lifted their 3-year-old son, William, onto the back of a gentle pony. The boy's delighted squeals carried across the yard, making her smile. Beside her in a rocking chair sat their 1-year-old daughter, Elizabeth, playing contentedly with a wooden toy Lucas had carved for her, Against all expectations, Zenobia had been blessed with motherhood not once but twice in her 40s. The pregnancies had not been easy, particularly the second one, but the joy these children brought to her life made every difficulty worthwhile. And they weren't the only children who called the Armstrong ranch home. 2 years earlier, a tragedy had struck a neighboring homestead when both parents died of influenza, leaving behind twin 6-year-old girls. Without hesitation, Lucas and Zenobia had welcomed Sarah and Rebecca into their family, legally adopting them and giving them the love and security they so desperately needed. As Lucas helped William guide his pony in a small circle, the twins raced from the barn to join them, their long braids flying behind them, their once solemn faces now alight with the confidence of children who know they are cherished. "Mama," Sarah called, spotting Zenobia on the porch. "Papa says we can all go riding to the north pasture if you want to come." "That sounds wonderful," Zenobia called back. "Let me just get Elizabeth ready." As she gathered her daughter and the supplies they would need for an afternoon outing, Zenobia reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. There had been challenges, of course, the difficult adjustment to ranch life, the whispers from some in town who thought Lucas had married beneath his station, the complicated pregnancy with William that had left her bedridden for months. But for every challenge, there had been 100 joys: the quiet evenings with Lucas by the fire, the satisfaction of watching her students learn and grow, the deep friendships she had formed with women like Mrs. Thornton, who had become like a mother to her. And above all, the enduring love between her and Lucas, which had only deepened with time and shared experiences. Lucas appeared at the porch steps, William balanced securely on his hip. "Ready, love?" he asked, his smile as warm now as it had been the day they met. "Ready," she confirmed, lifting Elizabeth into her arms. As they walked together toward the waiting horses, the twins dancing ahead in excitement, Zenobia felt a profound gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought her to Tulsa 6 years ago. She had come seeking refuge and independence, never dreaming she would find a love that would transform her life so completely. They had said she was too old for marriage, these anonymous voices from her past. They had been wrong. She hadn't been too old, she had been exactly the right age to recognize true love when she found it, to appreciate the gift that Lucas Armstrong offered, to build a life based on mutual respect and shared dreams. "What are you thinking?" Lucas asked as he helped her mount her horse, Elizabeth secure in a special carrier before her. Zenobia looked down at him, at the face she loved more than any other in the world, and smiled. "I'm thinking how grateful I am that you disagreed with them." "Disagreed with who?" he asked, puzzled. "All those people who said I was too old for marriage," she explained. "You said I was just in time for yours." Lucas laughed, the sound still sending a thrill through her after all these years. "The best decision I ever made," he said, mounting his own horse with William held securely before him. "And one I'd make again, every day for the rest of my life." As they rode out together, their children chattering excitedly around them, the vast Oklahoma sky stretching blue and boundless overhead, Zenobia knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, not too late, not too old, but perfectly, wonderfully on time for the life she was meant to live. And in the years that followed, as their family grew and changed, as the ranch prospered and their love deepened further still, Zenobia and Lucas Armstrong never forgot the unlikely beginning of their story: how a Boston schoolteacher, considered past her prime, had found her true destiny in the arms of a frontier cattleman who recognized her worth when others had failed to see it. They had both been running, he from his father's expectations, she from society's judgments. But in running away, They had actually been running toward each other all along. And in finding each other, they had found home.